The Psychology of Real Estate. Hello everyone, welcome to Signposts for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter, and I am ridiculously excited to have my most favourite person here, and when I say that it's true, literally, because he's my brother. This is Sam, everybody.
Hello Kirsty, hello everybody. This is the most legit podcast setup I think I've ever been involved in, so yeah. I'm nervous but excited.
Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've got really cool technical stuff which makes us look more impressive than we are.
Yeah, and I can hear myself talk, so I will apologise to everyone listening to this in advance.
No.
Because if this is what I sound like, this could be anything.
You sound good.
We'll see.
So here we are. We've got Sam Hunter here. Nice. I don't know about you, but I like our last name.
So do I. Serves a purpose.
And it's memorable.
Yeah.
It's easy. You can spell it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. It's pretty ironic that I'm a psychologist and my last name's Hunter.
Yeah. Well, I'm a real estate agent. My last name's Hunter. So
that works much better.
Yeah. I buy into the cliche.
Yeah, Hunter sounds aggressive and I'm a psychologist.
Yeah, and I try and be as empathetic as possible. So maybe that's why we do what we do.
Oh, well, it has been, ever since we started doing this podcast, I've thought about doing one with you. Did I say that earlier?
Yeah, and then we finally did it.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.
A long way later. But yeah, so Sam is in the real estate world. And how long have you been in the world of real estate?
This is my 13th year. Unlucky for some, but it's been a good career for me.
Yeah. And I always look at everything through a psychology lens. So anytime there's an interface of people in anything, I always pay attention. Whether that be how teachers are with students, whether I look at a business, how it works, when I go to a restaurant, I pay attention to how the people working at the restaurant work with the customers, everything, I always pay attention. So real estate for me is incredibly logical in looking at through the psychological lens. And you have a particular interest in people management, don't you? Because hang on, let's go back. So at uni you did sports management?
Yeah, I would say sport is one of my other loves.
Yeah.
And I thought, actually, how can I combine work and sport? And that was the 18-year-old version of me's path to success.
Well, that's kind of logical.
Yeah, so I did sports management, and I did a management degree in line with that because I thought it made sense to have the same word in 2 degrees. And it taught you about process and structure, but very little about people.
Really?
Yeah, and actually that's been the best part of my career since. I never actually did a lot of work in that space because I found real estate because my mum sold her house. And the guy who sold her house was a bit of a dick.
Was he?
And I thought he got paid an exorbitant amount of money to be a bully. And
really?
I thought I could make that amount of money and do it nicely.
I could do this better.
And that was how it started. So many people fall into that industry through a bad experience and either don't learn from it or do. And I think the people that do learn from it end up being the right people for that job because it's not an easy job.
No.
But yeah, that's sort of how it all started. And actually that became, everyone says that they get into real estate because they love property and they're passionate about it, and it has nothing to do with houses.
Really?
It has everything to do with people, right?
Actually, once you're in that role, and if you're going to do well, it's to do with the people skills, not the actual property.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned so much from you over the years because you find people at their aspirational best in real estate, but they're often at their emotional worst because it's a massive decision, not just to move house, but there's so much debt usually involved.
Yeah,
and
scary.
Money freaks people out. And so you go from the highest of highs to lowest of lows in a matter of minutes. If you're at an auction and somebody puts their hand up and outbids you on your dream home or something like that, or worse, you buy it and then suddenly you have to sign a mortgage deed. So there's a hell of a lot of anxiety that goes through people's minds. And I didn't realise this at the start. I just thought you put a sign out the front, stick it on realestate.com, someone comes through and you ask them if they want to buy the house, and away you go. And then I very quickly realised that you just have to understand what people are going through and communicate that you have that understanding, and then people suddenly trust you. And that's what real estate is, right? You're selling trust.
They feel safe with you.
Yeah, which is, again, relating that back to, you look at everything through a psychology lens, I look at everything through a real estate lens.
Yeah.
I can relate almost anything back to real estate because it's this weird shared experience that,
You've just made my brain explode. I actually don't know what you mean. What do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, you can relate everything back to psychology, right?
Yeah.
So you'd be watching your kids play cricket.
Yeah.
And there'd be a psychological element of something that goes on that you
Absolutely.
go, okay, this happened. It's the same thing for me. I think in real estate, I look at the decisions that people make throughout their life and how their home revolves around all that and what it means to them and why they did what they did and why they made that choice. Did they make it because they had to? Did they make it because they wanted to? Was it the right decision? Did they buy it at the right time? Did they buy it at the wrong time? Etc.
To what their own personal process was.
Yeah, and I think that's the skill that you learn over time. And I'm sure it's similar in psychology. You don't walk into your first client meeting on day one of being in clinical psych and know exactly what you're doing.
No.
In real estate, it's the same. You sit in front of somebody and you walk in there thinking, I'm going to sell the house the most amount of money, where the reality is they just might want to sell their house tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand that, you can't give them the right advice. And you probably won't win their business because you haven't taken the time to listen to them and earn their trust and earn their respect and earn the right to give them some advice.
Absolutely. So the capacity to read people.
Yeah. It's real estate agents call their pitch a listing presentation. And I was really fortunate that I think the main reason for my relative success over my career is because I had the right mentor at the right time. When the student is ready, the master will appear.
No, I like it.
And he sort of said to me, it's not a listing presentation, it's a listening presentation. And
nice.
if you don't need to learn scripts and dialogues, you need to learn questions. And if you ask the right questions, you'll get an answer that's maybe 20% of the real answer. And if you care enough and you're empathetic enough, you'll say, tell me more about that, or why is that?
And draw them out.
Yeah, why is that's my favourite question. I've got a 2-year-old daughter, right? And I say to her, she yells at me all the time, and I ask her, why is that? And I'm not patronising her, I'm genuinely interested in trying to understand her.
Yeah, you're not saying, don't do this, don't do that, you're saying why.
And it's the same situation if you're sitting opposite a family at their dining room table and they're saying to you, we want to sell a house. If you move on and say, great, let's talk about price, instead of saying, why is that? And genuinely trying to understand their motivations so you can give them the right advice, not just your agenda advice. That makes a massive difference. That's what makes a good agent versus someone who sells houses. Absolutely.
And so can you give us a bit of a run through of your career?
I can try, yeah.
Can you give us a bit of a snapshot?
So I started in real estate in 2010.
Yeah.
So the back end of the GFC back in those days.
Right.
And that, again, right place, right time. A lot of people think that's the wrong place, wrong time. But because it was such a challenge, it allowed me to build some of the key skills that you need to be successful, I think, in life rather than just real estate, which is discipline rather than motivation. If you want stuff to happen, you've got to be really consistent. And because people weren't keen to sell their houses or even keen to buy houses because the world was in a very unique spot at that time, all I did for 2 years was listen.
Really?
And ask them, like, hey, if you decided one day to sell your house, what would you live in? What does your dream home have that your current house doesn't? I'd ask questions like that and build relationships with people.
Yeah, and you don't learn during the good times, do you?
No.
It's the tough times when you really, I hate the word because we overuse it, but you create that resilience.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And it's a skill, I think, to understand the market around anybody. Like, we've just come out of 2 years of a ridiculous marketplace where the way I would describe it is, and hopefully your listeners will get this reference, but the market was the Autobahn. There was no speed limit. You could get wherever you wanted to go as fast as possible. No one was going to pull you up about it. It was pretty simple, and there was always a fast lane. Now people think that the world is crumbling around them because you're just on a normal freeway. Yeah. And things are still happening if you're following the rules and you have a good process and your car's serviced and you know what you're doing, your tyres are pumped up and everything like that. But there's a few things that you've got to think about along the way to get where you want to go in the right time. Yeah. And for a lot of the agents who've been in the industry, even for the last 7 or 8 years, it's been pretty easy. They've kind of just been order takers, and now they've actually got to understand people's motivations on both sides and empathise and respect their position and do everything they can to bring people to common ground. So again, I think good real estate is part psychology, part counselling service, and then you get to the marketing and the sales bit and the negotiating right at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, my career. We're going to have a lot of this. You can ask me a question. I'm going to tell a
I
story.
love it. I love it
come
because the
back.
tangents are good.
Yeah. So I started in 2010. My mum sold a house. The guy was a bully. I purely got into it to beat this guy. I'm mildly competitive.
Oh, family trait.
Yeah, and I've outgrown some of that like narcissistic competitive nature over the years. I think getting married and getting serious with somebody and having kids definitely humbles you. But I got into it solely to make sure this guy didn't give anybody the same experience as he gave my mum, and
But
also
you couldn't
take
actually,
all his money.
you couldn't actually, like extract him from the world, could you?
No, but I made sure that I only wanted to sell houses in the area that he sold houses in.
Oh, really?
And I would go and door knock all his listings, and I would put stuff in their letterboxes and everybody's letterbox. And again, I was really motivated, really disciplined, really consistent, and did really well early in my career.
Did he see this picture?
I don't know. I've never spoken to him again. He's no longer in the industry, so maybe maybe he got the message. Yeah, everyone's listening to this thinking, who is this aggressive guy? I promise I'm not really like that. I've learned some lessons. So I did that, and then call it 2.5 years into my career, I fell off a cliff. Because, as in my success, in inverted commas, stopped. Because I had 2 years of being hungry and naive, where I didn't know anything, so I couldn't tell anyone what I knew. So I would sit with people and I'd say, hey, I'm new at this. Give me a chance. I'll listen to you. I'll do whatever you want, and we'll get a great result. Then 2.5 years later, I sat in front of people and I said, this is what I've been doing for 2.5 years. You just have to listen to me. And I figured it out after that of what's going wrong. I'm telling people rather than asking them.
So you learned what not to do.
Yeah. I was being driven by my ego more than anything else, because I thought I was good at what I did, when I was only good at what I did because I didn't pretend to know anything. I got to know people. Everyone knows what they want.
The formula that you had been using, you changed.
Yeah, inadvertently.
Yeah.
Because I looked at my bank account, or I looked at the car I was able to afford or something like that, and I thought, I know what I'm doing. And the reality is everybody knows what they want. You're there to facilitate it. Right? So that is your job. Real estate is a skill, but it's a really simple process. And I realized that people, they buy into and they trust and they believe in the process, not necessarily the person. So if you walk in front of somebody and say, I'm the best, if you want to take somebody out on a date and you're meeting them for the first time, if all you do is talk about yourself, you're not getting a second date, right? Yep. But if you open the door for them, and you ask them what they want to drink, and you go and get them something like that, and you say, do you want to share this food, or offer them something, dessert, or whatever it is, and you
ask to get to know them.
Yeah, you genuinely at least appear like you're caring, and hopefully you do care.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of service there as well, and there's a bit of humility, and you're good at telling stories, you're good at asking them to follow up and tell you more about their stories, then you might get a second date. So it's the same thing.
That's a summary, isn't it? You went from genuine humility to overconfidence.
Yeah, it was arrogance. I think there's a really clear difference between...
See, I'm not going to call it. You can call it.
No, but there is a really clear difference between confidence and arrogance, and I think I have this. So to come back to your very first question, my career, we moved to London. Right. So I met a girl. I was actually introduced to my wife from a couple that I sold a couple of their houses for, and they said, you should meet our daughter's friend. She's cute, she's smart, you'll like her. And I was like, nah, I'm good, thank you. And I said no 3 times, and then finally I met her, and now we're married and we have a kid.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thank goodness they kept persevering.
Exactly. Persistence beats resistance. And so we got together and we were getting pretty serious, and we wanted to test our relationship, and I wanted to test my skills as well to see if I was actually any good at this. So we moved to London, and I thought on my first day there, I thought it's going to be really hard to be a real estate agent in London. It's a big city, lots of very smart people.
Pretty daunting.
Yeah.
I would be pretty overwhelmed by that.
And it was easy because people didn't care there. They didn't invest in understanding other people. It was purely transactional, and I actually did exceptionally well very, very quickly because You went
back to the humility approach?
Well, yeah, I didn't know anything. So I put on my best Australian accent. I extended my drawl. People would say to me, "What's this worth?" And I'd be like, "I don't know, mate. Let's figure it out together." And again, it was back to that first 2 years of I didn't know the area that I was working in, so I couldn't give people bullshit advice.
Yeah.
I had to say, let's figure it out together, and we would figure it out together, and that would build trust, and they would use me, and they would tell other people, and it went really well again. And fortunately, I didn't have to learn the hard lesson again, because I had that, and that was just reinforced to me that nobody assumes what you know, and you shouldn't assume what everybody knows, right? People are really savvy, so they want to understand that you get them first, and then you can provide a service that's going to get them from A to B. It's as simple as that. There's no flash.
Yeah.
And that kind of suits me really well, because I don't think I'm an overly flashy dude.
But you prove yourself in your substance. You don't tell them, you don't advertise and slam them over the head and say how wonderful you are.
Yeah, exactly.
You show them.
Yeah. And so...
That's our puppy, everybody.
Yeah. 9 weeks old. She's very cute.
Yeah, she's cute.
So we did that for a couple of years in London, and then I realised that there are loads of good people in this industry that didn't get any support from either their company or didn't know how to invest in themselves to get better. And real estate in England is similar, but imagine it's a few levels down, so people don't get paid as much, so they don't try as hard. So people don't get the same amount of service. So properties are probably undersold more than they're oversold, whereas I would say in Australia, a good agent gets a seller a hell of a lot more money than an average one. So I built a business there that focused on the problem that I had on my first day, which was how do I get to know... I was working in an area in London called Maida Vale. It's like the Goldilocks zone. It was pretty expensive properties that were being bought and sold by very nice people. So it was easy for me to build relationships with them and get along because they were normal. As far as I was concerned, they were normal. So I built a technology platform that gave estate agents in England the information on all of their area on their phone or on a computer or on a tablet or anything like that. It exists in Australia. There's multiple companies that do that for agents and for banks and everything, but in England it didn't exist, and so I built it, which was cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, and so I did that for the next...
Did you think, hey, let's do a startup? I'm feeling brave. Again, that would scare me.
It kind of just made sense, I think. One of the things that I realised while I was at uni was that I never wanted a real job. Yeah.
Really?
I'm not very good at being told what to do.
You're very self-directed.
Yeah, and it's not that I waste time or anything like that, but I... take school, for instance. I didn't love school because you were offered a set of subjects to pick from. Yeah. And none of them really set my world on fire. But I tried hard because I thought that was the right thing to do. So I realised that if you try hard, you can get results. And then once you're out of school and you have life in front of you, there's almost too much choice. Yep. So you go through that wilderness of like, what am I going to do now? And I probably should have packed a backpack and gone to South America and done all kinds of strange things and come back as a different person, but I didn't do that. I decided to go get a job and start working, and that's led me to where I am. And so yeah, starting a business over there was nerves and excitement are the same like chemical reaction in your brain, right? So it was a mix of those two. Yeah. And I was fortunate that I met a couple of people a hell of a lot richer than me, and a hell of a lot smarter than me. And so they put in all the brains and all the money, and I just kept saying, this is a really good idea for... I was the subject matter expert, so I could say, we need to build this because this will solve this problem for these people. And they were like, cool.
So you were the kind of the industry expert.
Yeah, to a point. And actually that was great because that was how we built relationships with our clients. That was how I stayed really active and involved in the industry as well. So I kept upskilling even though it wasn't my day to day. I made great friendships. We built a cool business that allowed me we've been back in Australia for a year now, but I've been working over there still. So we sort of took that COVID remote work mentality and expanded on it. We could do this from anywhere in the world. And so that's sort of, been my life for the last 13 years. It's always, like you say, everything comes back to psychology for you. I might have multiple roles, but I don't think I'll ever leave this one industry.
I think it's awesome. And so I was, thinking about this podcast and thinking about the scope of it. And, in psychology, it's well established that top 5 stresses in life, and you're a gorgeous girl, top five stresses is moving house. Yeah. And the research doesn't really break it down into buying and selling. It kind of talks about moving, so relocating. But it is true, isn't it? It's a very stressful process because I think you've got the point of clarification that you need to move and people contemplate for a long time, and the point of action. I think there's a lot of decision making and self-reflection, and then there's the process of culling through your things, and psychologically, you know, that's huge, isn't it?
I mean, people don't. They just hoard.
And they just move everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we came over today, you were just like, we still haven't unpacked loads of stuff. And that's not uncommon. You know, we bought a place a year ago, and our downstairs is still boxes from England.
Yeah.
And will probably be boxes from England, because again, it's stuff that we haven't missed, and if we take it out of a box, it's going to be harder to get rid of, so we may as well not miss it longer and then just get rid of all of it at one go. So I think you're exactly right in that people think moving is this big thing, but it's actually this enormous thing.
Yeah, and I was going to say it is.
Yeah. And I don't think so. If we park the real estate agent part of it for now and come way back in the journey, people start thinking about moving house years before they do, usually. Yeah. And they go through this relatively common journey, certainly in my experience, and I'm not going to speak for everybody who's listening to this who's moved house, and it may be different for you, but from 90% of the people I've spoken to, right, if we use like Pareto's law and a little bit more, they've all been on their phone looking at realestate.com maybe once or twice a month for the entirety that they've lived in the house that they've lived in, just to see what's like their place or what's going on, or have we missed anything or whatever it is. Particularly after they buy, people don't let go of that.
Really?
Yeah. And then it becomes this 6-month thing, and if you're lucky, you'll get an agent who's keeping you up to date with your local area, but most of them don't, because they're only interested in you if you can pay them some money. And that's a real, like, poor element of this industry. And that's something that the good ones are working to change. But when people think about moving, they're looking, and most people will be looking for a long time, and then there'll come a moment in their life that gives them cause for change. So they've got to move closer to a school. They're having more kids. Their kids have moved out. They're getting divorced. They've inherited some money, whatever it might be. Big, usually also stressful life moments.
Yeah.
Then combined with another stressful life moment, which is buying and selling a house. And I think they get to that moment and they think, okay, it's time to sell. And maybe they've not, if it's, let's say husband and wife, for instance, doing it, they haven't had the conversation of what do we really want.
Yeah.
They know they need a bigger house. What does a bigger house mean? You know, it's not just we need another bedroom and we need a bigger yard. It's, are we comfortable outlaying another 20 grand a year on a mortgage?
Yeah.
What's that going to do to our relationship, to our stresses? You know, how do we make that work? They don't have those conversations.
Yeah.
And there's no real material anywhere that says to have them. So I used to sit in front of people all the time and I'd say, like, a pretty existential question, but I'd say, why am I here?
Yeah.
You know? And they say, we want to move house. Okay, tell me more about that. Why is that? And people would go, because we need a 4th bedroom. You know, we need a big yard or anything like that. Why do you need a bigger yard? You know? And then you'd show them. So I think one of the ways that I would win business, and this is, if anyone listening to this is a real estate agent, this is a good tip. And if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking about moving and your agent does this, pick them, because it means they care. Before we talk about selling the house, I'd say, okay, let's look at your bigger yard and your 4th bedroom. This is what's on the market now. If you're thinking of moving in the next 6 months, the market might change by X. This is what you're looking at spending. Is this comfortable to you? Have you had this conversation? Have you spoken to someone about getting access to this kind of finance? And everybody, literally everybody, that's not hyperbole, would say, no, we haven't thought about that yet.
Yeah.
We'll get to that when we are.
Yeah.
And all that is stress that compounds over time. And buying a house is really exciting until the point that you buy a house.
Yeah.
And selling a house is really exciting after you've sold it.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But it's a really horrendous, stressful process where you've got to keep it clean, and you've got to pick one of 3 strangers who's, they're all saying they're going to get you the most amount of money, and then you've got to shell out what feels like quite a lot of money to you for them just to stand at an open home.
You know, I had a real estate agent one time. I was selling a property, and I said, look, I understand how this works. The thing I value most is my time. So don't bullshit me. Don't give me a number that is going to get you in and have me happy, and then come back in a couple of months or a couple of weeks and say, look, you know, realistically, this, I actually think this is more, and then talk me down to the number that was in your head originally. I don't like that. Don't bullshit me. What are you actually thinking? And he got upset at me. He couldn't be real. He had his process.
Script and dialogue.
And I had just kind of exposed that.
Yeah.
And he got cranky with me, like antsy. I don't do that, got defensive. And I said, yeah, I think you probably do.
Everybody does that.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, it's not personal.
Yeah.
And anyway, went through, sold the house, whatever. But yeah, then Future Houses, didn't go back to him.
Wow.
100%. And he's followed me. I'm not going back. I just thought it was just, you know me. I really value people's capacity to have self-awareness. Yeah, that didn't go well.
That story just made me think of a way we can relate psychology and real estate just a little bit, which is, so one of the things where I would sit with people all the time, and I've never ever met somebody selling their house that didn't want to sell it for more money than they sold it.
Yeah.
And I've never met a buyer that didn't want to pay less than what they bought it for.
Well, of course. You want to keep your money in your bank, yeah.
That is human nature. And I would sit with people all the time and they'd say, what do you think it's worth? Don't bullshit us, right? Tell us the truth. And every agent under the sun will say, we're different. We've got integrity, we've got honesty, and we'll get you results. And that's the 3 points that everyone says they're different because they do those 3 things. Right?
Real different, yeah.
And so I would sit with people all the time and I would say, for us to get whatever price it is that you want, but literally the most money, you've got to be uncomfortable about the pricing because that's what's going to make it attractive to the buyer. And it's a bit like in psychology, you've got to have some pretty uncomfortable conversations to have a breakthrough. I know that's probably a cliche term. And
well, I'm known as headbutting people.
Yeah.
Actually, that's the word that's used. With a lot of love and good intention. But it is, we're not here to have a counselling session and keep you in your comfort zone because you're not actually expanding. So we're gonna get you uncomfortable, 100%. And
that was a really sort of, again, seminal moment in my career when in my nature, I like to be liked.
Yeah.
And I have that character trait today. And I'm really aware of it. But professionally, it's about being respected and trusted, and ideally, once you've earned that, listened to, because otherwise what's the point? Like, people may as well not engage you if they're not going to listen to you and take your advice and ideally learn from the experience that you've had over 10 years, 13 years, 20 years, whatever it might be. And I used to go in there and I would, and again, this is where that sort of chasm of disbelief where I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, I'm doing all the things I was doing. What's going on? Why isn't this happening? It was because I was just nodding my head. And agreeing with people, and they weren't listening to me and I wasn't listening to them. I was doing whatever I could to try and sign them up, and people would smell that and go, this guy's not for us.
Not on the same page. Yeah.
And then I would then sit down in front of somebody and I would say, we're going to have a really intense relationship, and there's going to be times where you don't want to take my phone call, but you're going to have to. And if nothing happens on your house in 3 days, I'm going to come to your house again and we're going to sit at this dining room table and we're going to run through, is the marketing working? Is the price working, right? Is the house presented well? And am I doing the right job for you? Because if you don't put yourself on the chopping block, how can you run through the other things? And people don't want to hear that. What they want to hear is, we want $1 million. I'll get you 1.1 in 2 weeks and you won't have to worry about it. And the money will be in your bank 30 days after that.
That's got to be tough for people to think that you're going to be this fairy. You're going to come along and make their dreams come true, and it's not reality. I mean, you bring in bad news when it's just the truth.
Yeah, and that's the reality of it. It is a really emotional process for everybody involved, and you've got to address that. So if you think of it, we've talked a lot about sellers, but if you think about it from a buying perspective, auctions are a big way people buy and sell houses. They are designed to get emotional prices.
To create stress,
right?
And impulsive action.
Because you can see somebody on the other side of the room or on the other side of the garden, if it's at the house, looking at each other lovingly, being like, this is the house for us. And you're thinking, no, this is our house. What are you doing? Of course. And so your hand keeps going up.
It's like this tug of war.
Yeah. And it's good that it's transparent. So it eliminates some of that bullshit, because you don't have to rely on an agent saying, I've got another offer, but I can't tell you what it is. And I'm going to big up our industry for a second and say that very rarely do people at any level of an agent lie about having an offer, because it's just super easy to be found out. People can call your bluff so easily, and then you're backtracking, and again, you might then follow people around, but they'll never use you, so it's just not worth it. But at an auction, there's not even a skerrick of that. If no one puts their hand up, it's transparent. If you've got 4 people fighting it out, you know what that other party wants to spend, and so you've only got to beat them by $1 if you can afford it.
On the one hand, I'm thinking you're literally watching the market in action, but on the other, it is more of a hysterical state with emotion whipping people into frenzied fear. So it is
if an agent's done their job right.
So it is kind of like it is the market, but also in this amplified state.
But again, I think that's the point of, you're selling a product at the end of the day, so your job is to market that product to attract the right people in through the door, and that's why auction works really well, because there isn't a price. It's, you tell me what you want to spend and we only will say yes or no. and you have that conversation. That is how you can boil it down in its simplest form. It's, let's take beautiful photos of your home. Let's have an open home twice a week at the perfect time for the sun hitting your back garden and your pool or whatever it might be. So we will present this home in the absolute best light possible, and anyone can come through, and we will qualify them till the cows come home. And if they are in a range of what you deem acceptable, we will tell them to come put their hand up, and you get the opportunity to say yes or no. And then from a buying side, you have that same conversation, right? It's genuinely, we don't know what it's going to sell for. If you think it's the house for you, bid. If you don't, we'll call you after and tell you if it's sold or not.
Sure. On the one hand, I imagine auctions reduce the mucking around because people typically would have pre-approved finance, yeah?
For the most part.
Oh, they should, right?
Yeah.
Oh. But on the other hand, I imagine it would exclude a lot of people who aren't organised to get pre-approved finance, or I know maybe they can't.
I'm not an expert on the back end sort of formulas or process of finance, but anybody who's got 2 pay slips and a job that is a job can go and get a pre-approved level up to a certain amount.
Yeah.
If you buy a house at that level or under, you will get that money unless something material changes with your employment, right? Because a mortgage is not a loan against the home, it's a loan against your earning capacity. So they don't care what you're buying as long as you can keep paying that bill.
Yeah.
They're fine.
And what they'll approve is what they deem responsible.
And so we sit there. I would always have what we would call like pre-auction meetings with the seller, where we'd understand if you get a lot of people bidding and it's still underneath what you've deemed as your dream price, that is the market. You've got to make a decision one way or the other. But on the buying side, we would sit down with them and say, it's going to be a really high pressure situation, and I'm not going to apologise for that because that's my job.
Yeah.
But I want you guys to feel really comfortable at the end of the day about whether you buy it or not. And so you've got to have those tough, challenging, emotional conversations before the auction.
Do you get stressed about those hard conversations?
No, because again, fortunate to have mentors. I was mentored by a very experienced, very lovely lady really early on in my career. She helped me get out of that ditch. And she said to me, it's not your frog. So you can care, but not too much.
Yeah.
So you're there to do a job.
Boundaries.
Don't take on their emotional stress. So I first few houses that I sold for were all divorced ladies. And I think I could build a relationship with them because I would get to their house, knock on the front door, and as they opened it, I'd be taking my shoes off, and they'd say, you don't have to do that. And I was like, no, I grew up with a single mum. I'd get punched if I didn't take my shoes off before I walked in the door. And then they were like, oh, he's going to understand my situation.
Nice.
But I would take on their stresses. They'd be in bits because it was the house that they were forced to sell or whatever it might be. And I'd be like, I'm going to do everything I can for you, Ronnie. Like, this is all I care about. And there were times where I didn't get a great result at an auction, or I was presenting them offers well below. This is 2011, so it wasn't a good market. And I would have to say, my professional opinion is you take this. And I felt guilty about getting paid commission for selling for less than what they wanted. But my job was not to sell for what they wanted. It was to get their home sold and allow them to move on to the next chapter.
So this was you really jumping into their world and becoming quite emotionally engaged with the care factor without the boundaries.
Yeah, so I find it reasonably easy to connect with people on any levels. One of my favourite sayings, and why we decided to move to London, was it was like, if you can hold your own at a London dinner party, you can do anything in life.
I haven't heard that one.
I took that literally. I was like, I'm going to try that again, being competitive.
Is it true?
I'm figuring it out.
No, but London dinner parties.
Oh, everyone just gets really drunk.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it doesn't sound that harder.
Yeah, I think maybe when that phrase was coined, it was a more intellectual world than people buying £5 bottles of wine and putting a roast in the oven and sitting around talking about expat life.
Got it.
Or we just went to the wrong dinner parties maybe. So it isn't my frog. I care about making sure you guys understand this process as well as possible. And I care about you having your emotional moment the night before at home while you're eating dinner than in a 15-minute moment where it might cost you 50 grand more. And so I'd sit with people and I'd say, it's really simple, right? There's 3 prices that you need to come to, literally written on a piece of paper in your pocket, so that there's no question, right? And you've got a Hawaii price, which is you're going to buy this house and you've got enough money to go to Hawaii to celebrate.
Right.
Chances are that's not going to happen. But what is your... we've got the best deal ever price, because it's really important to know that, right? Because that's probably where you're going to start the bidding. And again, I'm having this conversation because I want people to bid as well.
Mm.
Then there's fair market value, and we provide sales.
Yeah.
They're curated,
Yep.
obviously, because we're trying to show them
So
what's comparable.
Comparable,
But
yep. Sales.
The rights, and I would say to anyone listening to this who's thinking about buying a house, don't just look at the agent sales.
Yeah.
Go and do your own research as well, because they'll pick the 4 or 5 best, and there's probably 2 or others in there that are 5% less than what they've shown you.
That's what we did with this place. So I'm pointing everybody to where we're sitting. We're in one of the rooms of a property that we just bought last August. So it's kind of a current topic for me, real estate. And the real estate agent, who was is a really nice guy, we would absolutely work with him. He did his typical thing and sent us certain sales as a comparison for the price they were arguing for. And I jumped online and had a broader look and said, yeah, but what about these properties? By comparison, I actually think this price is more realistic. And did a counter argument with actually the market. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that doesn't make him a bad guy. He's done his job, and he has found the right evidence, but there's always more
to support his argument.
Correct.
So I found evidence to support my argument, our argument.
That is negotiating 101, right? It's not adversarial. It's not us versus them. No. It's how do we find common ground? Here's what you've brought to the table. Here's what I'm bringing to the table. Let's have a conversation about it as 2 people who kind of want the same thing.
Yeah.
But we're coming at it from different parties. And so many people think it's them versus the agent.
No.
And so many agents think it's them versus the buyer. You know, there's this saying of like buyers are liars. And
really?
Buyers aren't liars. Buyers are emotional, uninformed people who have to make a decision to get a loan for $1 million after spending maybe 20 minutes in a property. They've never turned the shower on. They've never flushed the toilet.
Yeah.
They don't know where the sun comes in the morning. They don't know if the neighbour plays late night music on a Saturday night or anything like that.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
You know, like if you're going to buy a car, you can test drive it and go back as many times as you like. And the model's still sitting there if you want to think about it in 6 months' time.
Nobody thinks about that. If you go to an open home, you're in there for 10 minutes.
Yeah, and making a life choice, and the biggest investment you're going to make in 10 minutes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And so many agents don't respect that, right?
Yeah.
And so many people feel like that's normal, and that's totally not normal. You don't marry somebody after spending 20 minutes with them on the first date.
Exactly.
Right? You move overseas with them so that you don't have your friends that you can retreat to. You've got to sort your problems out and talk about them and communicate. So houses are really unique in that.
And I can understand from the real estate's perspective, if they have a whole lot of people coming through, that's a massive time investment for them. But for the ultimate buyer, they do need to spend a meaningful amount of time.
And that's, again, coming back to people buying process, not the person, right? Is that if you say to them the reason why we're going to go down an auction route or why we're going to go down a sale by this date is because if someone comes through on that first Saturday and you can say to them you can come back on Wednesday and the next Saturday and then the Wednesday and the Saturday, and you can spend as much time as you need here to get to know this place. One, you're making them really comfortable about spending their money or getting a mortgage. And you're taking that fear of we've only been there for 10 minutes, should we make an offer, should we not? You're giving them the opportunity to compare it against other properties in the market as well.
Are you saying that there's an understanding not to sell the property for 3 weeks and let everyone look for 3 weeks? Is that what you're saying?
If you're auctioning it, because the auction is, you bring it to that date. Right. I mean, there's other ways. So again, I'd sit in front of somebody and I'd say, how do you want to sell your house? And they'd say, what do you mean? Because there's more than one way. So you can auction it, you can do a normal for sale, you can do a tender, you can price it, you can not price it, you know, and there's good and bad to all those scenarios. Again, you don't recommend anything until you can understand why someone wants what they want and when they want it and what other external pressures are on them, because if they need a result in 3 weeks, you would always recommend auction because it's an unconditional contract. You're giving a lot of people time to see it, to get their finance sorted, to compare it against to everything else. You can ask questions, you can build relationships with them, you can have those conversations of get your Hawaii price, understand your market value, but then also have your oh shit price, which is like
the bottom one.
You don't want to drive away from the auction and say, oh shit, we should have spent $5,000 more.
Yeah.
And that's the emotional conversation that too few buyers have before they even make, let alone an offer. So a normal offer where you sign a contract, you give it, you negotiate. They don't know what their top dollar actually is. And so they often go past it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so emotional and there's so much fear around it that you definitely need to have yourself organised before you walk in.
I mean, when I knew that was a good thing to do for buyers was when I had people who missed out on properties at auction calling me saying thanks.
Really?
And I'd say, what do you mean? And they were like, well, we had that price, and they'd show me like the sticky note of their prices, which is cool. and it would go past their oh shit price. And I used to
Yeah.
call it that because I think it makes sense and everyone can relate to it and understand it. And they'd say, what that made it realise is this wasn't the house for us.
Yeah.
It was under that value. And,
Yeah.
they'd say, like, that was more than we wanted to spend anywhere else, and there was no way we were willing to spend that because we would put ourselves under too much pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what more do you want to hear when somebody they miss what they thought they wanted, but they're not disappointed and they're grateful that they didn't get emotional and get themselves into stress? And I mean, they probably would have been okay. I think anyone who's ever bought a house for too much money in the last 30 years has been all right. My wife and I, we bought literally at the top of the market. We'll be fine. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we didn't push ourselves. We might have bought at the top of the market what we bought, but we didn't buy at the top of our budget. And
I pity the people that had to deal with you. You would have seen them coming with what they were doing. You would have played their game.
I don't necessarily see it as a game because there's so much involved.
But it is different people with reading what their agenda is and why they're behaving the way they are. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say to people all the time, if they made me a really low offer and they'd sort of tap you on the shoulder, particularly because I started quite young, I was 22 when I got into this, and I would have guys like fatherly sort of age, and they'd literally put in a very low offer. Say the property was on the market at $750, they'd offer you $650, and they'd tap you on the shoulder and they'd be like, "You can get it for us, champ."
No, you're kidding.
And I'd say, "How do you expect me to do that?" And I'd put the burden of how to do it back on them, and they'd sort of look at you and be like, "I don't know." And I'd say, "I don't either, because it's on at $750. Have you got any ideas?"
Yeah.
And
that's them just putting pressure on you
Yeah.
to think you should just jump through this hoop and be Houdini.
Absolutely. And I think that's what people think a lot of agents do. They feel like real estate agents are desperate, and some of them maybe are.
Yeah.
But again, if you have a skill and you've set it up and you have a relationship with your clients and you understand where they've got to get to, it's really easy for you to have those, like, it's not an offensive offer or anything like that. And I would never say to somebody, "I'm not going to present that. That's, too low. How could you make that?" It's like, how will we tie this together at that price?
Okay, I've got a question that I've been playing, and I don't know if this is like a profoundly wise question or really, really silly.
Okay.
What do you think is more stressful, being the seller or being the buyer?
Being the seller.
Oh, look at that. Boom.
Yeah.
Really?
You got something to lose.
Huh?
So you already have a mortgage, maybe, right? Probably in this world.
First of all, was that a good question?
I think so.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. The way I would, if I can explain it in a overly simplistic way, buying's exciting, selling sucks.
That's true. That is true. Buying is a
loads of
future.
things.
You're launching. It's a new adventure. You really can't wait to get in there. Selling is, I have a reason I need to sell this, and I need to make sure it's a financial amount that, you're right.
And I don't want to lose any money, because you have it already. Whereas if you're buying something, you haven't bought it yet, so you haven't lost that property. And so, again, if you're thinking about selling your house, you've got to present it really nicely. You've got to open it up to strangers. You've got to depersonalise it. You've got to pick the right agent who could make a material difference into how much tax-free money you end up with to move on to the next part of your life. So there's so many more variables. When you're buying a house, you need to arrange a mortgage, and you need to ideally line up your end of lease if you're renting with the place, or you're going to be selling as well, that's
when you've got both stresses.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And I would always say to people all the time, don't buy before you sell, because then
don't buy before you
there's
sell.
There's a great statistic that people who buy a house and then sell theirs end up with 10% less money in their pocket.
Really?
Because of the pressure.
They're pressured. They have to.
Yeah. So you sell, and everyone's like, "But then I've only got 30 days to find a house." I said, no, if you've got a good agent, you've got control. Someone wants to buy your house, you say, "Well, I need a 6-month settlement, but if we find a house in a month, we'll just tie it in together." So it's not this pro forma way of doing things that everyone feels that it is, and it's a really good agent's job to communicate that with people and say, "Hey, my job is to give you control. You tell me what you want, I'll facilitate that."
Yeah.
And we will just make decisions along the way. All you've got to worry about today is if I'm the right person to be on this journey with you, and if I care enough to stick it out and make sure we get you what you want. If you need 6 months, you got 6 months. If you need to be sold in 2 weeks, then we need to have a really serious conversation about price, because you're probably going to be really uncomfortable with what we need to market at to get you a result in 2 weeks.
So basically sell, but don't have a deadline. Try not to have a time pressure, so that then you can just make the best decision, not the most pressured decision.
Yeah. Get your ducks in a row.
Yeah.
Because then if you know what you're leaving, then it makes figuring out where you can get to a hell of a lot easier. Whereas again, if you go and buy something because you fall in love with it, right? Because you're emotional. Then you look at your place and you're like, okay, we've got, call it 3 months. There's a pretty standard extended sort of settlement period. If you've got 3 months and you've got to sell your place, that's a month of getting organised, or maybe 2 weeks of getting organised. I know in your case, you guys did everything in like a week.
Yeah, it was a bit crazy.
But that's very on brand.
For me.
Yeah. So you're giving yourself time and structure, but if you buy something and you've extended yourself there, you know what you have to do to move on. So let's say you wanted, really these numbers, you want $1 million for the place that you're selling, and you've bought something for 1.5. You can't buy that new place unless you get minimum 900. Imagine someone comes along and offers you 910 on day one. What do? Do you take it because it solves the problem?
Yeah.
Or do you reject it and then have unknown, hopefully getting to your $1 million where everything kind of lines up perfectly? Most people take it and run. Whereas if you hadn't found what you liked and you were like, we're going to give ourselves time, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever, to find what it is and communicate that to your pool of buyers, who'll probably be grateful that they're buying at this point in the market and not having to buy a mortgage until later, particularly if it's going up. Then you've given yourself time. You're not under that pressure.
So historically, have you actually said that to your customers, your clients, and say, look, just try not to buy yet?
Yeah. Most of the time, people have been looking pretty actively for their next home before they speak to an agent about selling theirs.
As you said earlier.
Yeah. So it'll be on and off for years, right? But then as they're thinking about moving it becoming more of a real thing for them, it'll be every week, sometimes every night for 6 months. And that's how they get to know the market. And that's a really good thing for everyone to do. By the time you're sitting in front of them, they sort of know what their place is worth. They sort of know what they want to buy. And you'll say, right, are we going today? Or when are we doing this? And they'll say, we want to buy before, because we want to know where we're going. And then I'll say to them, have you thought about the pressure that I'll put you under? And most people say, what do you mean? And if you've been doing
That's
this...
so holistic of you to really care about the person and care about their journey. It's
that's
wonderful.
Through experience, though.
Yeah.
So I've seen people go through this stress. And my default... I'm like, and my wife will tell you this is a weakness as well, is I default to how do I solve this problem, not how do I listen.
Yeah.
And that's the skill that I've learned over time is don't try and put the fire out. Ask what's made the fire get a bit stronger or whatever it might be. It's a pretty lame analogy, but we'll run with it. And so I
almost fix the cause rather than fix the problem.
Yeah. So have you thought about the pressure it's going to put you on? And people are like, what do you mean by pressure? And then you've got real life stories to tell, right?
Let's talk.
And then suddenly the 2 other agents that are out there who said, yep, we'll get you on the market as soon as you buy something, and I've got something for you and we'll take you through. They don't stand a chance from a competitive point of view, but also these people are like, wow, we hadn't actually considered that. And then when they go to the dinner party on Saturday night and everyone talks about property, as they do at any party they go to or whatever it might be, they say, we were talking to our agent.
Yeah.
He told us about like all the pressure we put on it, so we actually are going to go on the market early, but we're going to have a 6-month settlement or whatever it might be. And everyone else goes, wow, I've never heard that either. And, oh yeah, we bought before we sold, and we probably could have had a better price, but we didn't quite get there. So that it's easy for me to talk about it like this, and I've probably been talking too fast, and hopefully
no, you're doing great, and you're doing great, but it's I've never stopped to think about that.
That's all I think about.
So that's really, really good advice, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, sell before you buy.
Yeah.
Just to keep that one transaction less pressured.
Maintain control. So you have, as a seller, you have all the control. If you want $1 million for your home and someone's offering you $3 million, you can still say no. If someone offers you $500,000, if someone offers you $1 million, you can still say no. So you have all the control. And you can impart the majority of that control within process and systems and how you're going to do it and methods of sale and ways of negotiating into your agent, right? And you get control of who you pick to represent you to do all that. So that an agent's job is to suck all the emotion out of the process for both parties and be very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And again, try and find a resolution that everybody is acceptable of. Maybe they're not happy with it because again, every seller wants more money, every buyer wants to spend less. So you might not be happy, but you do get what you want.
You know what? Just to wrap things up, I want to say this. I love talking to people who have found the thing that they love. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know one guy, and he what's he do? He gets mowers, like old ones, and then he restores them, and he has all these vintage mowers. And he's one of the happiest people I know. And when people have got a career and they love it, you can tell they're passionate. And you and I have never talked on this level before, but it's like I've got to know you know,
Yeah.
the fire in you.
I think
Awesome.
I always think to myself that I'd go be a psychologist if I did anything else.
Really?
Because it's a similar, you get to talk to a lot of different people. You get to understand them. That helps you understand yourself, I think, a little bit more as well. I just don't have that study in me. Whereas, you know...
Well, you're probably doing psychology now anyway, so you're fine.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool. And I love psychology, as you know. And I talk to people who, you know, they say, oh, I want to set myself up so that I can retire early. And I think that's wonderful. But my response is I'm not in a rush. Like, I'm really happy. I'm also not that old.
If work is sustainable, then you can do it forever. And, like, my understanding of retirement is it's to be put out of commission, and I don't ever want to be put out of commission.
No.
I don't want to work 80 hours a week for the rest of my life, but
Yeah.
you find something you're good at, if you can talk about it, right, on a weekend, life's not so bad.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love your passion. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm so delighted to introduce my gorgeous brother, Sam. And, and if you want to jump online and find me, the website, kirstenhunterauthor.com, Facebook and Instagram, Kirsten Hunter Author, and Twitter, Kirsten Hunter AU. Sam, thank you so much for your time and all your passion and your expertise, and I genuinely didn't know a lot of that.
Thanks,
It's good.
Yeah, thank you.
See ya.